Hello. Hello. Right.
Morning.
Hey. Still can't see you though.
No, I know I might have to restart. I'm not quite sure what's happening here. Um, but when my video doesn't show up, usually I have to restart. So I'll see you in a sec.
Okay. Oh, sorry for the yawn. Got about 4 hours sleep last night. 4 or 5. 4.5. Hey, Doug.
Hey.
Doug, am I mistaken? Are you the cartographer or are you the lawyer? I think you're the lawyer. Are you both?
I'm not sure which both you're invoking. I'm an attorney.
Did you get an undergraduate degree in cartography or mapping or?
I did graduate work actually in the geography department at Columbia.
Ah, cool.
I started in work involving the very early days of the Earth Resource Satellite Program.
Are you talking about Iris?
I'm talking about it was ERTS. It was mapping. I worked at the Goddard Institute for Space Studies outpost next to Columbia for a guy named Jerry Coyner, who was was working on the first data focusing algorithms of the 4-band Earth resource satellite sensors. The autofocus program of the satellite data relative to the ground truth maps.
Mm-hmm.
So I and a team would go out into the farmers' fields in South Jersey. There was a 1 mile by 1 mile square that was the test reference, and we would map the fields, document the crops, stage of growth, and all the rest, and then go back and play with the delta setting to dial it in so that it wasn't either all one crop or like 1,000 crops. So it actually, correspond to the algorithm output.
Well, I probably used your data depending on what the year it was, because I was arguably building the first GISs for the U.S. government from, let's say, the mid 80s to the early 90s. And so I got going on that one probably around 86, 85, 86 in that time frame, and ended around 93, having built several systems for the government to do a lot of this mapping data, but it included soil type data, vegetation, slope data, mapping vector data, all of that. So
yeah, this would have been, it was a year and a half before I went to law school, so it would have been like 78, 79.
So I was probably using your data. And by the way, my project ended up creating mapping data, not for the United States, but for, a country outside the United States, which I still not name.
Right.
Hey, Tammy.
There you are.
All right. It is 6 minutes past the hour is what I've got. So, hey, Tammy, you're still on mute.
Morning.
Hey, good
Good
morning.
morning. You weren't affected by this earthquake. Was that anywhere near you?
Which earthquake?
I don't know. My wife said there was some major earthquake in British Columbia,
Okay, well, nope, but that's
like a really big one. So you should have known a bit. Like you should have been rocking and rolling from it based on the size of it that she mentioned. If it was anywhere near you, so I'm assuming it isn't.
Well, I didn't feel it either, and I'm only what?
okay,
an hour and a half?
Alaska. So there's a 8.2.
Yeah, it was like really big,
Really?
really big.
And so that was first report I see is 6 hours ago.
And there was a tsunami warning that they retracted, but the number was just sort of breathtaking because it was like, you know,
I see 7.9.
yeah,
Big anyway.
yeah.
Let's see. Java, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, Chile.
So I guess you guys just sleep really soundly.
Like I told actually, it's interesting you mentioned that because another friend of mine who's in Missouri on Facebook 2 hours ago asked me, "Are you okay?" And I didn't know what she was talking about. And then she said tsunami warning.
That's
And
what she was
so
talking
I
about.
basically slept like a drunk baby, and now like 7.9 I see. You know?
Yeah, it was big.
I didn't even feel it. And the power is still on, so that's cool.
Yeah, I always keep an ear out for those things because I remember in the music business back in the 80s being in LA and getting tossed out of bed at the La Mondrian Hotel from a rocker that hit it, that was close enough to LA, I guess, yeah.
Well, in the Bay Area, I was in, I think it was the 89 earthquake. I was at work. It was a little after 5 o'clock, so most people, you were already gone, but it was a little after 5, and I remember I was walking in the hallway. It was a very long hallway, and I was near my office door, and I could see the hallway sort of twisting and turning, and the floor kind of going like this, and the hallway was like maybe 1,000 feet, but it was clearly like doing this. And that was the most I've ever seen a building flex during an earthquake. I don't remember being scared. I just remember being amused by the building doing that.
Well, a friend of mine looked in his rearview mirror and he was on that highway that pancaked.
Yes.
In that quake. Yeah, and he saw it like literally behind him. He was no more than 300 yards from the last end that didn't. But it was horrifying. Just horrifying. Yeah.
Well, that's got to be the only case I can think of that's harrowing. I never used that word, but that's
yeah. Yeah.
Hey, so we may have a small group, but I actually came prepared to talk about some work.
I would have expected nothing less.
You got hammered in here pretty good.
Third time's a charm.
Was it the third time? Oh, geez.
Well, the third time you've come saying you wanted to present work and charming it up.
Okay, I got it. Okay. So, especially in light of the recent thread conversations about is it presentation or is it conversation,
Yeah.
I remember there's a lot of activity on that one.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys saw my post this morning on that, but I think, presentations are best done in conversation. And conversations are mini presentations in my view also. So
that's that's an interesting question, but I think we should save that for like Thursday.
Well, my first question that I wanted to open up with, let me see if you guys resonate with this, was essentially the format of this particular Tuesday session, right? It could be an in-depth dive, which I think some people came with. Last week, I came with the impression that, hey, this would be kind of a mutual meeting of the minds where we each put something into the pool of meaning, right? And then there's Tammy's format, which I'm hoping you're going to do still, Tammy, which is the more one-on-one, in-depth complementation discussion with an audience viewing it. So last week, since I was coming with the, hey, let's all bring in a little piece here at a time, and I was told, hey, just go in depth. Today, I'm prepared to go in depth, but I want to make sure that that's okay and that that's what is not going to detract from what other people expect from this meeting.
So just to throw some pieces that have surfaced for me around this, I would welcome, by the way, doing that. I think, I always sort of gravitate toward the meta inquiry in terms of what are the challenges around this, right? So on one hand, we were just talking, about the focusing algorithm for Earth resource satellite data. Like if you zoom in if you set it to finally, you have 50 crops where there are 3, and if you set it too broadly, you have 1 crop where there are 3. So one dimension of it is, from a contextual standpoint, where does what you are about to present fall within the sort of larger contextual frame of reference, and has the foundation been laid so that people know, that you're talking about a balloon, not a dirigible, and not the Hindenburg. Like that's one piece of the puzzle, because if I don't have a reference going in, I'm not going to be able to process or relate out of the box. Right. It's going to diminish how much I can distill out of it or I can draw out of it. The other part of it is, is there a way to approach contextualizing as a meta exercise first, so that number one, folks, and doing it quickly, folks present are located and know where we're at and where we're starting, but also folks coming later have the ability to access a slowly growing, enriching, and increasing map, but where it's on them, go to here. If you have questions, go here with questions to people that can play guide or tour or whatever in relation to this. But here's a way you can sort of catch your breath, get up to speed, so that you can jump into the middle of a conversation that started 6 months ago and we're at episode number 8, right? So that's a piece of the mechanical puzzle of this. And there's a dimension of that as well, which is, so following that scenario, if I'm walked right into a map that's right down to the trees and the shrubs and the whatever, overwhelming, I'm going to bounce off. Whatever pull I experienced just got, destroyed. Yep. So there's an imperative, as that artifact chain is generated and evolved, there's an imperative to have an array of intro, deeper, where people can be facilitated in finding and pathing their way to the thing they can relate to or they're interested in or they want to pursue. Because somebody may be really interested in the sensing pieces of a platform related to people's feelings in real time and have absolutely no interest in archive, database, document, non-document, technical stuff about how we're taking care of zeros and ones. And the object is for the platform to recognize that based on information they provide, to say, our best guess, I think you would want to go here, not there. But if there's a fork or question to be raised for the platform to facilitate effectively, then it surfaces the question and goes, I can take you here or here. Which one makes more sense? And if you require more information, then let's go deeper there, right? So those are just some of the things that really, I think in terms of rubber meets the road territory, are really sort of important. And what tends to happen is somebody really has the burning desire to do the show and tell, and we jump over that first step of this is on what subject, within what context, in what part of, et cetera, and it becomes the chaos. It becomes the casualties left by the side of the road and people clamoring for attention and other people in, confusion.
And arguing about details.
Yeah. And so anyway, and I'm complete with that and ready for your deep dive, and would love you to open with sort of contextually, what is it you're about to share in the frame of what larger, greater, grander?
Well, let's also hear from Tammy and see if Tammy has an input on that.
Yeah, go Sam. This is what we're here to do. So I appreciate the guidance from Doug and invite you to begin.
So Doug, in fact, my very first questions I have written down were exactly how to have that meta conversation, right? So I was thinking, do we have some sort of global context, and you can call it vision or framework or mental model, but what is that context? Now, the only one that I could really grab onto is something that really drew us all was this global governance model question, okay? And that global governance model question, I think, is the only thing that's really, kind of given as a kind of a absolute, turns out, from this group. Now, from that, the question was, do we do brief statements or do we more detailed statements or do this slow build? Now, what I heard you do describe was a slow build, okay? What I'm calling a slow build, okay? Which is in order.
Hold on. You're breaking. Sam. You're breaking up. Hold on. You're breaking up. Your audio is getting bandwidth affected. So we're getting garbled audio from you.
Maybe it's the delayed tsunami.
Or it's the universe saying, you know what? We're not going to let you do this. Even when you're ready to do it, we're going to stop you.
I'm just going to talk to myself, okay? I'm going to record myself talking to myself.
I've tried that. It doesn't work so well.
Let me make each of you co-host. So if you choose, you can actually do all the host-like activities or responsibilities or recording, whatever. Okay, so testing, 1, 2, 3. How is this coming through, or is this okay? So I don't know.
Audio.
Okay, so I don't know how much of that went through, but what I was thinking was what I was calling a slow build was what you were describing. Okay, which is that if I sort of present a blast of 50 different PowerPoint slides, that's the too much detail, you're going to bounce off kind of scenario. Okay, and so the slow build is where we, in my mind, okay, sort of go step by step by step by step. So at least those of us in this conversation are following. And it's also a way for people who are watching to essentially follow and then plug in their pieces, as long as it's all in context. Okay. But I want to do the slow build with a small set of prepared slides. So I'm wondering if this is going to turn people off or here's what I could do. I could have the slides over here because I have a different machine. Okay. I can talk through them. And if necessary, bring one up for a few seconds at a time and then release it so that we can still see each other reacting and interacting. That's one way to do it, okay? So the first thing I wanted to share was this thing that I'm calling my email to Doug Engelbart in July of 2005, okay? And I really wanted to share that because it takes everything that I'm doing in context and connects it to why I'm here in GCC. So there is a link that I put in Slack, and let me bring that up. And okay, so I'm going to share it. And I'm going to share it in my Facebook announcement for today's meeting. Okay. There's reasons for this because I'm on a different machine than the one that I'm actually presenting on in Zoom. And I'm going to go to global. And bring up that event. I know this has kind of slowed things down a little bit, but I want you guys to see this. Let me read it to you while this thing is happening. Yeah, I think there is something wrong with my internet connection. It's being really slow right now. I don't know if it's a message from the universe.
Do you want to just pass it to one of us? So, like, pass the link here so that we can post it?
Yes,
Sam?
I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to do that right now. So I'm going to send it to you, Tammy, in Facebook. Even that's taking a while. Do you see that?
I got it.
Yeah. Okay, and for those who
are you going to put that in the chat, Tammy? In the chat here?
I'll do both. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
See, this is a message to Doug Engelbart on July 9th of 2005, and it was a response to another thread of conversation. But so the title actually doesn't. The subject title doesn't actually reflect what's in there. Let me just read it because it's part of the record here, okay? And keep in mind that Doug is suffering from a number of people who have left his research lab at SRI to go to Xerox PARC. They just spent about a decade building basically a wiki-like system with hypertext, with multimedia, with word processing, with outline processing, with word processing. So he's sitting there thinking, you know, why are people not getting the larger message? Why are people only... Yeah, it says my internet connection is unstable. Can I go?
Okay, well, yes, absolutely. Just do the best you can. I hear you now again, Sam, so.
Okay, should I stop my video so that it actually attempts to do a better job with the bandwidth? Okay, let me try that, okay? And here's the actual reading of the message. Well, I kind of wish I was on the record with this because I feel deeply about this, okay? So the message reads, Doug, what I have in mind is there needs to be a framework that's well-conceived but malleable that can provide a rules of engagement level of guidance and direction setting to a community of projects and initiatives. This framework needs to lay out what it means to be a member of this community, the rights of each initiative, and responsibilities of each initiative, and how to protect the IP of the larger group while motivating individual contributors and teams to participate in this larger framework. which would represent the entire set of research initiatives you have defined under various papers, notably Bootstrap and Kodiak. I believe that such a framework, though tricky to define, is possible given sufficient thought at the formative stages. This would require careful consideration of each use case of participation roles, from the central guiding stakeholders to the leaf contributors. I hold as an existence proof, it's a proxy, I know, the GPL, okay, which is the open source license, the framework that allows open source software to thrive. Though I believe the framework I propose would be somewhat more involved than the GPL, it serves as an example of a framework for decentralized cooperation that preserves fundamental IP concerns. I would like to use it as a model for a bootstrap of the NLS or Kodiak or the ABC community framework that not only addresses software projects, but also see community activities in development of human and tool system integration and definition / evolution of best practices. Once drafted and properly reviewed by authoritative IP notables, Lawrence Lessig comes to mind, such a framework could clearly represent to all, that includes investors, supporters, users, contributors, enterprises, foundations, integrators, and etc., what it means to be bootstrapping. The terminology may evolve. With such an understanding in place, my hope is that individuals could more clearly understand what their role would be in a community, what the responsibilities and benefits are, and more quickly reach a go/no-go decision on participation and involvement. Such a framework would allow multiple, indeed many, parallel efforts, each supporting each other in asynchronous fashion. There would be a small group of responsible individuals representing the central guiding role. This would include you, for example, to ensure that the community and initiatives were directed in ways consistent with the objectives of massively scalable collaboration. The central responsibility would be responsible for tweaking the collaboration framework, the rules of engagement, but would otherwise be independent from each particular initiative, though of course the individuals themselves could hold multiple roles, including ones tied to a specific LEAF project. This is all very rough and high level, but if you see merit in this direction of thinking, I would be eager to flesh it out in more detail so that it reaches a level of definition that you would like to support. The best regards, Sam. Okay, so even though it has memes in that statement that are no longer, let's say, state of the practice or state of the thinking, it is the seminal message from me to Doug, and that spurred a set of conversations around what I'm currently calling collaborology. And the reason I think it's important is because the whole focus here is this decentralized, scalable piece. And it attempts to ask the questions, why do teams fall apart? And in fact, I prefer to ask a different question. You know, it's not that teams go bad. In my belief, teams start bad. So starting well is a very different perspective than say, hey, you know, what are the problems that take a team and derail it? Okay. So that, though not directly responsive to GCC, was basically the start of all of my focus, because up till then, I'd been in Silicon Valley for, what was it by then, about 25 years. Okay, so as a technologist, as a VP of engineering, as a CTO, as various other kind of technical roles. But this is the message where I basically said to Doug, hey, the team fell apart. Why did the team fall apart? Why can't we hold teams together? That intense scrutiny of why teams fall apart is what I'm interested in. Because if we can understand that, then hopefully we do a better job forming teams, keeping them together, and scaling teams, and getting them to work effectively together. And I, of course, didn't call it collaborology then. You know, it was several years before I ended up, coining that word. But that is really what set me off for now the last 13 years. Now, that led directly to an event in 2008 called the Program for the Future. And Program for the Future was basically the 40th anniversary of Doug's demo, where he showed all of this great stuff in the context of how do we increase our collective capability to solve global and planetary problems. And whereas SRI did a retrospective and celebration and talked about the PC and all of that, to me, the PC was irrelevant. The personal aspect was irrelevant. It was the network aspect of it that was much more interesting. So we wrapped the SRI celebration event with a 1.5-day event where not only do we celebrate Doug, but we also said, what else remains to be done? What of this vision is still unrealized and unimplemented? And that's where in 2008, I asked him, how much of your vision of giving people the ability to work together at scale, how much of that vision has been realized? And that's when he said 3.2%. And in 2010, we did another follow-up conversation, and we tried to go deeper into one of his ideas, but the event had another interview that I did with Doug, and I asked him the very same question.
When was this? I'm sorry.
This is the same date, December 9th in 2010, 2 years after the first event.
Okay.
I said, Doug, so in the intervening 2 years, have we gone any further? How much have we done on your vision? And he said, now we've got to 3.6%. And it was at that point that I committed to him that I would do everything possible in my lifetime to work on the remaining 96.4%. So that is the genesis for all of the work that has led up to our communications right now. Now, if I'm allowed to, there's a second artifact that I wanted to share with you, which is something called Introduction to Program for the Future. The reason I'm interested in presenting at least one slide from that is that there's 8 foundational principles that are guiding Program for the Future in the way I think around Doug. Okay? And let me just bring up what that is. In fact, I posted it into Slack just this morning. And let me get to that. If you go into Slack and look in that channel, I think it's in the Collaborology channel. It should be in there. But let me just bring up the foundational principles, okay?
If you could put the link in the chat here, that would be great.
I'll do that again. I'll send it to Tammy, and I will then hope that Tammy can share it with the rest of us. Okay, Tammy, here it goes. Here's the link. Okay, there it is. Okay, so I'm going to skip most of the presentation, but I'm just going to go to just the principles, and you could call them foundational values that are really driving my set of questions here, okay? And this is everything that I've been trying to do to embrace and extend Doug's work. The first principle is this thing called stewardship. And this is what most people call sustainability or thrivability or fragility or resilience. This is the idea that we want to ensure that all future generations have a healthy planet and an ecosystem in which to thrive. Because if we're not actually interested in that objective, then none of the rest of this really matters. So that's idea number one. Idea number two is this idea of collective intelligence. That we want to learn and improve how we create better solutions as a community, how we do that better than we can as individuals or smaller groups. That's the scalability idea. The third idea is the coevolution one. That in order for us to do this, we have to use any means possible to maximize the good that we can do. So that means certain tools will come into play, but it means that we also have to evolve ourselves. This is the way of being different, Doug, your theme, how to do human being differently. How do we now take our tools, improve ourselves, take ourselves, improve our tools, take our tools, improve ourselves, and go in this co-evolutionary cycle so that we're not thinking like the same way we did 20, 30, 50 years ago as our technology continues to evolve, right? We cannot continue to do this. And so therefore, the acquisition, the development of skills, the development of language, the development of mental models requires that we as humans evolve and grow, not just our tools, okay? So that's the co-evolution idea. The fourth idea is scale. Scaling means these problems are planetary-wide, they're global. It means that no individual, no company, no country, no regional government, no even international entity, no, nothing we know of has the means or the skill set to actually resolve all of this on its own. We have to be able to work together. That's the notion of scale, and that's the notion of impact. We need to make this impact at planetary scale if we want to take an active role in ensuring our survival. The fourth one is leverage. The leverage idea basically says, if I'm a well-meaning person and I see a great problem over there, no matter what it is, whether it's hunger, whether it's abuse of rights, whether it's deforestation, I could go work on that. But I would be that proverbial drop in the bucket. How can we work at a meta level to that so that we can hope to affect systemic change rather than carrying that drop, towards the fire, in the forest? So how do we think more meta? How do we think so that we actually, get to Buckminster Fuller's trim tab idea rather than just doing brute force, here's my 5 ergs of work and, let me just add it to everybody else's 5 ergs of work and let's see what we can do. Okay. So that's the leveraging, that's going meta. The sixth idea is bootstrapping. Bootstrapping says you can't wait until you actually know the right solution. You have to act fast and learn fast. And hopefully don't do damage in the process. That's the bootstrapping idea. Because if we wait until we understand, it's going to be too late. But we also cannot just immediately go out and do something that's going to cause more damage than just staying still. So there's a key piece of judgment required in there. The seventh is incubation. We need to spawn a number of parallel and hopefully complementary initiatives. No single initiative by any group is going to be sufficient. We need people running experiments in parallel, but keeping tabs with each other and basically feeding each other and resonating and cohering with each other and just killing off projects that are not working and keeping going with projects that do work. So in line with the leverage, in line with scale, in line with bootstrapping is this idea of incubation and really just trying to get ideas spawned and experimented with. The eighth idea is, in order to do this leverage, I'm calling this the ecosystem DNA. And by that, what I really want to do is create a set of guidelines that are so simple, anyone can understand them, but if adopted, could have planetary impact. In other words, no organization is going to go out there and recruit and sign up and specify and manage and direct an effort this large. This has to be adopted from the ground up. So adopting some DNA, it's like creating a little virus that has some good DNA that everybody gets infected with, that enables them to connect better and to collaborate better and think better and visualize better. That is a much more effective way of creating this than to set up these large organizations with large charters and large legal responsibility and et cetera, et cetera. I'd rather see it done with 8 billion people all taking a look at a sheet of paper and saying, is this for me or is this not for me? Those are the guiding principles. Those 8 are the guiding principles that for me define Program for the Future, and to me sort of draw this context for me and how I'm thinking about everything that I'm doing. Now, there's a bunch more in that presentation, but that's the most important slide. I think it's slide number 5, I think it is. No, 4. It's slide number 4 in that presentation. And that's the one that really lays out, how I worked with a group called the Amigos. I was with a group from 2012 to about 2017 or 16. It went for like 4.5 years. And by the way, Tammy, those are conversations we recorded in audio. We started with those 6 days a week, and they all went for about 75 minutes. And then towards the last year and a half, it started dropping down to like 2, 3, 4 times a week. But it went full and hog heavy. And by the way, that was the group. And let me just name names. That was Dino Karabeg, that was David Price, Froda Hegland, and probably a handful of other people who weren't quite as regular. But those were the key regulars.
Can you hold on a sec? That's sort of an important data point. Would you mind jumping in to the chat and just enter some of the names?
Yeah. Let me do that.
That's a data point that needs to be captured. And so those audio recordings, in principle, could be put through a transcript generator.
Absolutely.
For access and harvest.
Yeah, and
something we'll have to talk to Glenn about.
And by the way, they're all up on the ones I've been able to post are up on SoundCloud. So probably about 30 or 40% of them are up on SoundCloud, and the rest of them I still have to update at some point.
Okay. See, and this is just an aside. This is where my sort of timeless meme kicks in. There are these artifacts, and where I sort of developed a sensitivity to this was when I was involved in the music business, right? You put heart and soul into demoing an artist and create, an album or two worth of recordings, and if they didn't get an immediate bite or whatever, it was the industrial corporate thing of this quarter's earnings. If they didn't generate immediately, then it was history, it was gone, it was worthless, it was of no value, on to the next. And the truth of the matter is that the pull and the energy of the artists in expressing and generating, creating that work, and the people that believed enough to participate in the demoing process of that work certainly indicates that there's a likelihood or potential for some population of people to appreciate that work out there in the world, even if the established channels and systems and gatekeepers didn't decide based on their drivers that it was the deal. And the same principle here in terms of there may be some of that is, dated or qualified by its historical context relative to state of technology or whatever at that time. But as a practical matter, the creative, generative, conceptual value that was created lives. And I relate to, what I've done, what I'm doing through that lens. And it's very possible these conversations may not escape gravity and achieve a level of mass momentum or following that, makes them ubiquitous. But if I can contribute to the emergence and development and design of the platform and system that at least reposes, contextualizes, tags, mimetically frames in such a way so that their persistence on call and on signal and trigger as part of a sensing dimension of that platform can be surfaced and correlated for those who may or may not at that point in time, next month, 6 years from now, or 100 years from now, be interested, have curiosity, or find value. So the figuring out how to create the ubiquitous opportunity of that kind of discovery or correlation or contribution, divorced from real time, divorced from, transcendent of ego in terms of, this is me now, mine, I'm responsible, I'm source, this is about me. It's not about me. Fuck that. I'm a channel. And for whatever value I'm channeling, the focus is on contribution to the collective. So, this is a perfect example. You're talking about a whole bunch of, in real linear time hours, a lot, but when you do the transcription thing, distill it down, and then you tag and sort and sift. You take out the extraneous, stuff that isn't, valuable for reference or navigation or mimetic accessing. The kernel boils down substantively in terms of what's of value to another human being in the right context, place, and time. That kind of harvesting is sort of the vision image I hold for what we need to build. And many of those kinds of repositories, part of the imperative also is how many of those kinds of repositories are getting lost at the older end of the tail for either being trapped in old hardware or old formats, or on, my first computer was an NEC 8-inch floppy, like how much stuff is in 8-inch floppies that is deteriorating and gone and getting lost, even within a digital persistence of frame and unlimited copying and all that stuff for, capture and save purposes. A lot of the really heavier thought leaders generated a lot of stuff in the early days of this, Doug Engelbart included, where, what artifacts are going away. Perfect beta for that piece of the platform, gobble it up, distill it down, queue it, tag it, mimetically, contextually frame it, do, advanced text recognition, triples, analysis in terms of all that stuff. It's like, this is easy. This is like low-level shit, right, technologically, but it's just for the doing of it, So, I have a lot of curiosity about that. Fleming shared his virtual community site, which I felt bad about, making him go through some blast from the past pain, because there was a registration failure, and I pinged him and I said, he said, you can check it out. Here's the URL, whatever. And I went and it got hung up and he had to fix it, and I got in. But holy crap, there's stuff in there. And Howard Rheingold's early brainstorms and those early online virtual communities, the names and the people in there, in their wild youth, like rambling and running and button heads and all that. There's huge intellectual capital in there that, a few folks had the presence of mind to persist and capture and believe was worth, keeping it going. But all that stuff needs to be sucked up and, made available and accessible.
I agree with you even any stronger, Doug. This whole idea of keeping what we create, what we co-create, I believe is step number 2, okay? Step number 1 is the piece that Tammy brings, is to actually have these conversations, actually to smash these neutrons together, okay? To create the fission or to create the fusion or create the little, subatomic articles that actually then have to get tracked by recording all these events, okay? So I think as a practice, I see that these are the first 2 steps. And by the way, what you're describing, what Frode and I were trying to describe is, written up in this thing called timebrowser.info. And if you read timebrowser.info, Doug, it's expressed in different words. I would say 98% of what you just said. Okay, along with some of the other diagrams I could point you to. So I do think now we're in the process of trying to figure out where the foundation of this barn is. How do we lay the straw? I think that's where we're starting to talk about steps 1 and 2. Step 1 is getting the people together, having these conversations. Actually, maybe we should split that up. Maybe there's 2 steps there. 1 is getting the people together. 2nd is having these conversations, okay? And the 3rd is actually, making sure that we keep these conversations in some form that can then be mined as you were describing, Doug, okay? So to me, this feels like part of the barn that is seemingly coming into focus for me. Pulling the people together, having these conversations, creating some way to hold these conversations for later sharing and later use. Let me even ask the question. Does that sound to the two of you and the others listening to this as foundational to what it is that we try to do here?
Tammy, you want to go first? I mean, I can respond to that, but I want your voice. You're doing an audience thing, and I want to do a check-in and make sure you're not harboring stuff reactively.
Yeah, no, you go on that question, and then I'll weigh in.
Okay. I think there's a paradigmatic shift that's more foundational than that. That's actually starting the story at chapter 4 or 5. And that from a Doug Engelbart vision, from a platform and systems architecture design perspective and orientation, there's a foundational paradigm it's about looking at everything, blank sheet of paper, case of first impression, from the perspective and through the lens of an experience. And I don't want to derail your sharing, so I want to do a check-in too, because this is, it's either potentially a diversion or it's exactly what Tammy imagined, which is you and I doing a sensing feeling around each other in terms of
one-on-one. Let's do a three-way.
Yeah. So what do I mean when I use those words? Like, what am I really referring to? And this is, and I want to make sure I do, proper attribution, because this is at the belly of the beast that Fabian Zulansky, who's my colleague in Argentina, and I have been evolving and drilling into for 3+ years. If you put on human being experiential glasses, so and the basis of that is on the principle that the generative doing of whatever people coming together looking to solve the problems and or change the world in the way we want to change it, it's human beings who are going to do that. And I forget which point it was, but you touched on it in one of the 8, which was the idea of maximizing the realization of the individual human generative potential, right? For every individual involved. And as a tag on that, and figuring out how to make sure every man, woman, and child on this planet can be involved. So there's an enabling piece to that as well. I'm not sure, Sam, I think you froze. Are you still with us?
I still hear and see you.
Okay. So if it's about us, and I mean that as here as the larger, and the larger frame of our species, and if it's about transcending the industrial and the competitive, so it's about us all in service to commons, which is all other living things, which is the planet we're on, which is the whole kit and caboodle, and maximizing the individual human generative potential and means for the maximum number of people to contribute to play, then that's where the human being's experiential priority informing and guiding the development, the architecture, the use case, the specification comes into play. That the nexus of human being plus the generative, collaborative endeavor informs not just the ingredient parts of data and artifacts for their own sake or disassociate from or independent of, but only to the extent that they're accessible and they're referenceable in real time, in the moment, in the collaborative process and flow, in the context of human collaboration. And so it's also why we ended up sort of expressly framing data and artifact generation is a byproduct of human generativity. And disassociate from contextual value add has no value in the abstract, has no value out of an application, experiential application frame. That and the whole industrial thing sort of places emphasis everywhere but the human experiential. So it places all the emphasis in the data. It places all the emphasis in the tools and affordances. Look, Ma, what we can do with zeros and ones. It places all the emphasis on can the machines get better at replicating, human thought processes and generativity and creativity and all of the rest, which is AI and all of that. And at the end of the day, the human beings are operators of, or are, occupied with the care, feeding, and maintenance of, or are devoted to improving machines doing, rather than technology and machines in service to helping humans generate faster, easier, cheaper, better, you know what I mean, from wherever they are and wherever they sit and whatever their skill set and literacy and affordances are. It's turning that telescope around. It's a really big paradigmatic difference. And when you turn that telescope around, it really has a way of highlighting the important stuff, right? The important stuff is less about whether I grab and capture every bit and byte. The important stuff is whether I've captured every bit and byte with all of the meta tagging and all of the referential, contextual attribution and related stuff in real time, in service for future correlation and accessing and retrieval and referencing, because the platform recognizes that, oh, Sam and Doug are now having a conversation with, Dick and Jane 8 months from now, and they're invoking the same references as this thing back here. And they might really like to be able to share access to that with them and or reference it and or whatever, ping, 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 and it pops up. And whether you and I remember it or not, it reminds us. It's sort of like, that's what I always loved about the brain. what I loved about the brain is that it remembered when you made a connection to something, the same thing 6 months before in a completely different context, and it goes, oh, you just put in the name of, Hieronymus Bosch. Is that the same Hieronymus Bosch you entered, 6 months ago over here in this part of the plexus? You go, yeah, it is, or no, it isn't. This is a whole not different Hieronymus Bosch. And I get to put in a second Hieronymus Bosch, and I don't have to worry about, am I violating database rules and integrity? Because I'm naming the same field, the same thing, and it's a different entry. All that, that the brain to me was very human. And it was the only application to date that I ever experienced that level of, this is serving me. It moves in the way I think. I have an idea, I create a thought, I can attach something to it, I can have it as a bucket, I can put a picture in there, I can, connect it to a calendar, I can correlate it to other people, I can do whatever I want, and it remembers. It remembers for me. It keeps track of that. So that paradigm shift to me, and fleshing that out, it's sort of like, what is the universe of human experiential needs? Things that would really help and facilitate me and my doing, right? And starting there and attempting to pull out from there the yin and yang of me becoming known by a particular project, group, or collective or system. And so that's about self-declaration, and the system pulling out of me what would help it do that well, and vice versa. The platform helping me in a progressive step of escalation of pull investment of time and attention, pull more time and attention, time, attention plus action, clicking and entering, and right in that dance of escalation of my investment, getting me dialed in and up to speed and on the page for working with others, which goes to your scale. And I see that system being designed so that it can be a home for everybody and all projects, that it's a universal affordance resource. And it has Tammy's piece in terms of, it's not just an individual person who's registered and answered all the questions, but it also could have the personal wallet affordances, identity affordances. And it's the same platform that builds into it a universal account ledger system, like a holo system for the planet. And every man, woman, and child gets an account in service to universal basic income, which absolutely makes sense and is where this is going to have to go anyway. And that some grandfather in a mud yurt in Mongolia doesn't have to read, doesn't have to write, doesn't have to have any literacies, but he's got a little device with a biometric reader that says it's him, and that is wirelessly connected, and that has a button that enables him or her to say yes or no, or I want to buy or I don't want to buy, or I agree or I don't agree, and that's about voice, because if you want everybody on the planet to be able to contribute, on the most basic level, everybody on the planet has to have the ability to express themselves in the system. And that's the most basic way of, that's the most fundamental mode of enfranchisement I could come up with, Fabian and I could come up with. A button that says yes or no. Don't have to learn anything or know anything or have any onboarding or prerequisites met in order to have a kid or a relative or whatever go, yes or no, press the button. And I'll stop there. So that's my fundamental.
Do you want to react, Sam?
Just Doug, what you described is what Doug wanted in a DKR. He called it a dynamic knowledge repository. This is where everybody has access to. It's basically the modern day Library of Alexandria, but one that we each contribute to and we each have access to. And nothing gets deleted, everything gets revisioned, but there's always a ground truth that never goes away. And all those affordances that are built on top of that, yes, absolutely. That's what got demolished in the early 80s when people went, this really horrible way of, in fact, I would blame the Macintosh for introducing all of that stuff, but that's another story. But anyway, that's my quick 30-second reaction to that, Tammy.
This is fantastic. And I think it's really important to be able to kind of pass the mic back and forth in terms of tagging onto the presentation / conversation. A big part of this is biologizing it, bringing it into each of our bodies to be able to know what is resonating and what is, what it feels to me like is accessing almost like a remembrance, right? So there's, Doug Engelbart, had a series of insights that motivated him in his life and life's work, and has inspired you, Sam, and many others to see and work towards a universal signaling and knowledge, and use the tools, but also, understand the human condition and the importance of us being in it. And so there's a really beautiful reflection between your work and what has really pulled you to devote yourself, as well as Doug's. So, and my own, I would say that, the in setting the context, the context, as you related it, Sam, being deeply inspired by Doug Engelbart's work, I would put forward that there is your own work that you saw resonated in Doug's work, that you absolutely, you just deeply understood was deep in your purpose. And it's my belief that that is happening all over the planet, and that we call it things, we make it our own, and our task is to understand that regardless of what we call it, we're actually reflecting a deep need that is replicated across the planet. And that's where we unify. And it might have different names. It's a very important series of considerations to specify and to look at the metric sides of things, the pieces that interact with the zeros and ones, and deeper, in a sense, from that is our intention and what it is that we're actually looking to do as a vision that is moving through all of us. So having the opportunity to take in, to reflect, it's kind of like the it's kind of like making love, I want to say, because it's like you're offering something, and then how is it received, right? And there's this, and I also talk about love in terms of it's not, for me, I want to move towards something, not away. I'm much more motivated by the pull than the push, because there's so much push and it's a vibratory rate that doesn't do that scaling that's needed, because people need to actually just be drawn and have multiple points of entry and all of those pieces. So while ever it's really important to get to the specifications, the dialogue aspect of how we co-present these dreams and visions and how they reflect in each of our work, that's the interoperability piece on the human side that allows it to be bioavailable for others, right? So, so yeah, thumbs up. And sometimes it takes a while to kind of spin out what we've heard, and but this is the work, and it, I think, allows it to be more understandable for a broader range of people. And so I'm stoked to do both the let's put out the specs. What are the things we need to be able to be truly to uphold the values that we perceive or sense would best serve a support of the commons and what we know we need to create. Can we be in that? Not as a, and what does power look like in that? You know, there's a different state of being in terms of, you know, when you're shining and you're bringing something, that's a beautiful light that doesn't have anything to do with power in terms of the imbalance of that, but rather an alternative energy source that draws us all in and together. And so I'm just wanting to put my finger on some of those pieces to add to our collective pool.
I love it, because that's why I refrain so much from being in this lecture/broadcast mode. You know, I want to co-create. I want to do that slow build with people who care and people who are mutually loving and mutually deeply looking towards this beautiful future. And that's why I really hesitate to even put name out there, okay? Because name is associated with ego, and it's associated with ownership and all that sort of thing, okay? So one of the ways, in fact, when you were speaking, Tammy, that I began to reframe what I've been calling Dictopedia is that the denaming process. It's a way for me to figure out what I've been calling something maps to what Doug is calling something. Maybe 80%, maybe 99%, maybe 20%, but at least we can sort of figure that out. But as long as Doug's using CMM and I'm using DKR, it's like, okay, these are different things. If we don't go deeper, if we don't peel the onion, if we don't actually do that mapping at the second or third or fourth level. So I really like what you're saying. And Doug and Tammy both, you both touched on, and by the way, I went through these 8 principles super fast, because in this scaling of human capacity, this collective intelligence piece, a key idea of Doug's is human augmentation, okay? And so much of computation has been human automation, not augmentation. And that's, I understand from, as you say, the industrial frame, why it makes sense. People love efficiency because they love the bottom line. They love the top line. They love the bottom line. It's all about that. But yeah, there are no people there. You know, you take a look at the top line, you know, there's not a person there. The bottom line, there's not a person there, right? But I also want to make sure that we can talk about the totality of things, which is things, ever since the emergence of the PC, there's been the office automation and organizational enablement, but there's also been the human side, which is, you know, I mean, it started with gaming, you know, believe it or not, you know, people wanted to get this entertainment value, but out of gaming came this interaction piece where they're, you know, with other people in that game. And so I just want to make sure that there's this thread of human augmentation and human interaction that has been evolving, even though much of the investment has been towards the human replacement and human automation, which I think I, as you, rail against. Okay, but let's also recognize that there's this other thread of activity around what could we be differently than what the organization wants me to be. Okay. So this idea of augmentation, I mean, it's it's in Doug, it's the name of his lab. It's the Augmentation Research Center, for God's sake. Okay, that's what he called it, ARC. So he clearly recognized that we have to grow our individual and collective capability, and that's where he felt he was a failure, because he couldn't get this conversation with the mainstream, with the people that made the investment dollars. By the way, I tried with in the 90s, tried taking some of these ideas, and it used to be called groupware. Remember that word? It used to be called groupware, and that was like anathema. It was like a curse word in the venture community. Nobody invested in groupware, nothing. Okay, and I was drawing diagrams of what you could do in 1991 and 2 and 3 of essentially what is now LinkedIn. And in fact, in 91, I was writing up a spec for something which is essentially now Waze, okay, the traffic automation system. People weren't interested in those investments way back in the 90s. They were interested in organizational, let's say the SAPs of the world, the Siebels of the world, automating the organization. But they weren't looking at how you and I could be better. And I think that's the real challenge. I say the shift is what's important. It's always been there, but it's been de-emphasized. And so now with cryptocurrencies, with ourselves being able to look at mutually agreed upon currencies and values transfer, even that is a set of words that I prefer not to use. But that, I think, is something we want to help grow. The other thing I want to link back to is when, Tammy, you're talking about us getting away from what I call things, of where each of us calls things differently, and trying to do all of that unwrapping so that we actually get to the real common core. To me, that's the modern day Tower of Babel problem. We have so much smarts and so much written work and so much academic material and so much marketing material that to unravel all of that and really understand, oh, this is the same as that. I mean, look at Microsoft. They've applied 17 gazillion acronyms to basically, the same stuff year after year after year after year. Is it DAO? Is it ADO? Is it database? Is it API? Is it SDK? Is it OS? Is blah, 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 blah. Okay? And you look down at the bottom of the things, things don't really change all that much. But it serves the organization, because it means everybody has to continually invest in their products and in their framework and in their mindset. And that means that you're not investing in somebody else's. It's a brilliant, way if you can actually market it and, leverage it properly. We have to be able to, shatter all that to sort of get at the inherent ideas among these things. So I don't care what you call these 8 ideas, but, they're probably familiar to each of you. But that's what is trying to shape, my thinking, and we can rename them. And in fact, that's why, okay, I'll throw out another name. That's why, for what I've been calling Dictopedia, the whole point is gather multiple definitions or multiple usages so that we understand the common elements, okay? The other thing, the flip side of that is take a definition and then see what Doug calls it, see what Tammy calls it, see what I call it. But this definition is what, is common to things, okay? So that's the flip side of Dictopedia. And by the way, when we call it that, Jack Park calls it topic mapping. Okay, even he and I, who have known each other for like 10 years, are using different words for some of these things that we're working on together. Okay, that's the ego, so involved. So sorry to go on this multi-long rant, but I just wanted to just say, these ideas about augmentation is so central to Doug that I want to make sure it's not lost when we're talking about us growing as a community. Okay, it's all about augmentation of the individual as well as a group, not about automation and replacement. Over.
There are some pieces of the puzzle embedded in the 8 that let me back up. So 18 months, the first 18 months of Fabian's and my endeavors involved unlearning, deprogramming, and jettisoning the industrial language, imprinting, beliefs, constraints, rules. It took a good 18 months to get out from under the lion's share of that and really drill down to and try to come to the basic language of, the ingredients of human generativity and collaboration and value generation. And value in this context, obviously not being value equals, fiat currency, wealth, power, authority, control, but value as this broadly multifaceted and diverse array of forms, tangible, intangible, and other, within the context and framework of human beings, living things, co-creating, coexisting together. So the premise of the paradigm shift, what's become more and more clear as a sort of almost a byproduct of that, is that a lot of the stuff on the far side of collective, collaborative, human generativity is emergent, meaning that in the doing of it, the constructs and the sort of embedded and programmed orientation toward expressions of power and will, right? That I have an idea for the fix, the solution. I am going to generate, or we, even escalating it to we are going to fix this problem and we're going to produce this solution, right? That whole conceptual frame has a huge amount of the industrial embedded in it, not consciously, but present and accounted for. And its effect and impact on the potential generativity in that gathering of people and effort and time and attention is to constrain or limit or bias it unconsciously. And I jokingly refer to them as the dark arts, which is either coercion or incentivization or manipulation as the means and mechanism to elicit or generate or produce or motivate human generative action or involvement or contribution. But there are also sort of dark arts aspects to that, the meme of fixing and codifying, constructing frameworks, constructing rigid things. Even the language itself carries an industrial qualitative dimension to it. And the truth is, and my sort of highest totem for reference and source is nature. Nature doesn't have any of that crap. Everything in nature is a generative, emergent resultant product of all the living things in an ecosystem, emerges and reveals an ecosystem, right? when something comes from without and disrupts or destroys a piece of that puzzle, its effects throughout the system are immediate and experiential for the creatures living there, right? So we, because of this cognitive capability we have, our love and devotion to constructing at things in the abstract, hardening things up, dimensioning and framing things, I believe has embedded in it a very high potential and ability to both limit and constrain potential value generation, but also to, in effect, back those emergent opportunities into an industrial box, and that as a sort of paradigm and methodology is failing all around us. And it's like what got us here. And one of the things we've got to figure out how to get from under is the drive to do that. Within the 8, as you articulated them, there are some of them where it's purpose-driven for a kind of codification or capturing of either a framework or rules, or even if it's co-consensual, co-created and consensually originated. The minute it's stood up, the instant after that is the very real likelihood that there are people outside of that frame that may or may not fit within that frame, or even find the existence of the frame conducive to their engagement and connection. So there's just a real load and risk and danger in looking for the frame, or orienting toward the construction, generation, or production of a frame. And in like 75% of the places where that comes up, you can really ask the question, like, is it really needed? Like, is it really serving a purpose or helping anybody as this abstraction that's been constructed next to or in parallel or on top of full experiential here and now doing of generating together, right? It's the minute you go to the abstract, there's 99% of the time it ends up sucking everything, infecting or coloring or distorting everything with an industrial, qualitative, experiential risk. So, and like, but how do you let that go? Like, how do you do anything without any, and I'm not going to that construct doesn't have an element of itself that isn't important, but it's not what we've been articulating it as. What would be, and this is, by the way, the process Fabian and I went through for 18 months, which is like painful, but what could we replace that with as a languaging and expression that is more organic, is more biologically friendly, is more inviting, is more flexible and adaptive and evolutionary, in terms of the piece of the puzzle where you're really, you're trying to, create some referential fixed pieces of the puzzle in terms of navigation or whatever, but not the other. What's the new of that? What's the new version of that? And just as a punctuation, your last point about languaging, first step is thinking it. The second step is publishing it, putting it out there. And language is, in that progression, is a huge step. It's a huge generative, creative act toward making something enact and appear and manifest in reality. Think it is in my head, put it out there and publish it as it's now out in the universe. It's out there for other people to react and to experience, pull, and to join in. And how that's languaged is a huge thing. And I have a huge allergic reaction to secret handshakes, special language, color codes, initials and letter codes, and all of that stuff, which ultimately make things opaque and inaccessible and create huge barriers of entry and play and understanding and ability to relate. So I'm complete.
Tammy, would you like to respond?
Follow the energy, Sam.
Doug, I agree with you 50%. And I think the answer in my simple mind and body and soul is very simple. Okay? It's not to diminish the intellectual or the mental or the logical or the abstract. In fact, as I was saying a couple days ago, that is part or maybe whole of what uniquely characterizes us as humans. But the problem has been that in so taking that capability and valuing it so much, we've kind of diminished the other aspects, the heart, the sensual, the enjoyment, the bliss, and all that sort of thing, right? And who was it? I don't actually have the quote right in hand, which is that the mind is a terrible master. But if you flip it where it serves the heart, then it's a tremendous servant. So if we actually get, and by the way, by heart, I am taking that to mean the rest of us, not just the heart center, okay? So if we actually take all of ourselves, okay, all the different elements, the spiritual, the heart, the emotional, the physical, the sensual, all of that together, and harness our minds in service to that, I think that is sufficient for us to realize the huge change in ourselves that we need before we manifest the change out in the real world. But it's not to say the mind and the abstractions and all of those constructs should be left alone, okay? That, I think, is throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And there's reasons why. I mean, just look at the language used. That's already technology. Look at the ways we use Zoom. That's technology. Look at the, even the calendars we use. That's technology. Could we do what we're doing right now without any of that? Clearly not. So let's not put it in such, value-laden words as, it's too much technology. Okay, we are ourselves co-evolving along with this technology and ought to recognize its value, so long as we're not saying, oh, geez, all of these constructs dehumanize the rest of us. And I think we're probably none of us in that position saying that. Okay, we're all trying to figure out how we can be differently in this world. But I want to be different by not just saying, oh, we want to be human, without really understanding that the intellect, the mind, our constructs, our language, our tools, our desks, our houses are part of what makes us human. And we wouldn't be here today if those things didn't exist. Now, here's the flip side of, and you can totally contradict me by saying, we could, in a small village, all be sitting around the fire, meditating, silent, and we'd be perfectly fine. But that's a vision that I don't know how to get to today. And without that being our reality, to get there requires that we communicate with each other, that we share visions of what is possible, that we create a path from here to there, that we take the steps to do what's needed to get from here to there. All of that requires language, it requires communication, it requires expression, it requires transmission, it requires reception, it requires interpretation, it requires decision, analysis, action, planning, all of that. Those are all technologies. we need to make that subservient to who we are, but not to diminish it, but not to let it take over.
Yeah, I don't have any disagreement with any of that. That's less the piece that I'm trying to sort of tease out. It's where we stand up as a element or piece of the puzzle going forward, the frameworking and articulation of, when you were talking about, art in the Doug Engelbart situation and looking at how do we stop teams from falling apart, right? And one of the proposed dimensions of the solution set was co-evolving a sort of set of principles. That's the kind of endeavor and stuff that I'm not sure is actually an effective strategy path. That I think that's sort of an approach, paradigmatically an approach of an industrial imprint. It's almost an instinctual response. And I'm not sure that the exercise of attempting to codify is actually meaningful, valuable, useful, relevant, because it's literally obsolete the minute it's hardened up, and the moment of codification by those who codify it, one other person enters the mix, and they're not part of that process as a co-author, and they're not up to speed and familiar on an internalized and organic basis with its significance and frame and meaning, and it's irrelevant. And there's a us under it, and there are others outside of it, and the ability to really have people get on board. The construct of that is an industrial nexus that doesn't work for human beings. It just doesn't succeed. It breaks down, fails, or people bounce off. And so that's the dimension of sort of codification, formulation, construction that I think needs to be replaced. And in a lot of cases where the instinct is to create that or stand that up or draft that or whatever, it ends up not even being needed, because if everybody's experientially on the same page, then we know it, we've internalized it. And when there are wrinkles or deviations, there's a collective response. And how do we co-evolve the approach to handle that, or to get somebody up to speed, or to calibrate a difference or whatever, in human terms. But I don't know that the codification ever works. There can be a sort of aspirational, referential accrual of values and aspirations that folks rally around or align around, but it's incidental to the human beings in the experiential act of co-generating, co-creating. And that's the piece of the puzzle. Technology, I absolutely, the sort of our cognitive ability to create things that help in terms of technology and machine. I have no challenge or issue with that. I'd love to see the fruits of that in service to us, where you left off, as opposed to us and working in service to it. That inversion, but this habituated orientation toward codifying and creating a framework of, be it values or protocols or how-tos or rules or whatever, even the languaging of it smacks of the industrial. And need to replace that. I think we need to come up with a new linguistic, articulation for that piece of the puzzle that is much more organic, much more biologically friendly, emotionally friendly, experientially friendly, and it's a complete this is a completely new thing. Like, I don't even have a name for it, and I'm not even sure how to sneak up on it, but I know that it's a thing. It's not a framework. What is it? And what are structures in nature maybe that might provide reference or metaphor or invocation to address it? And I suspect it's somewhere in complex systems and networks like that, the whole rhizomatic kind of thing, and that, in rhizomatic networks, there are structures that comprise it, right? So, but they're emergent structures. They're not created structures. They grow. They grow out of the network and out of the imperatives of the living things within it. So, just to clarify.
You want to go? Because I'll go after you.
Sam, I'm really just looking at where the energy is, and you have it. So I want to just follow the energy.
Thanks. Doug, what I would like to remind myself and hopefully remind you is we are part of nature. We are emergent from nature. Our capacities, our capabilities are an emerging phenomenon in nature. So allowing that to happen, allowing that to flow through us, using that to guide us, if we are sensitive to the flow of the universe or the source or whatever you want to call it, is a gift. And on this idea of, agreements being irrelevant or obsolete by the time that they're written, I couldn't disagree more. There's so much that we've created that we still refer to. The Tao Te Ching, thousands of years later, is still one of the three most revered works in China. The Constitution, 200 and whatever, 50 plus years ago, 40 plus years ago, is still a thing that we think is one of the crowning achievements of Western civilization. So this thought, this almost dismissal of written word / agreement / protocol / principle, I think minimizes its value and doesn't recognize what it does for us. If we didn't have the agreement to meet at this particular time, we wouldn't have this conversation. That was a written expression. It was an agreement. Nobody was dehumanized in making that agreement. We could have made a different agreement. So I think there's a strong, and I'll say, recoil that I see in you and possibly Fabian, since you're speaking kind of as a team towards this. So I'm willing to play the game with you. I'm standing up here saying, I don't get what you're saying, okay? I want to get what you're getting and saying, but I'm going to stand up here and say, I don't get it right now, because there's a lot of value in what we're doing, and none of what I'm proposing, in my understanding, dehumanizes me or anyone else. I don't see it. So if you could point to an example where some of the things that I've been describing or proposing dehumanizes us or diminishes our experience, I'd love to hear it. But right now, I can't think of one myself. Over.
Let me see whether I can find what sort of, raised the tickle for me.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe it wasn't in the 8 principles, it was in the letter.
Yeah, keep in mind, I even acknowledge that email, that letter, represents some things that I don't hold nearly as strongly now. But that was a 2005 expression. You know?
No. I appreciate that, but it serves, and it's an important what I'm trying to reach for and surface. And by the way, it's not an either or in terms of the process Fabian and I went through. Not a rejection whole cloth. It's a separating out the for what for us was wheat from the chaff, and the chaff being the industrial and the stuff that has the baked in power, authority, control.
I get you there. I'm with you
the
there.
Contaminant components, right?
Yes.
And so the it's the it's your language's framework that could serve as rules of engagement, level of guidance and direction.
That was 2005. Yes, I get that.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the part of it that
and by the way, that's a part that I'm kind of unattached a bit from, this rules.
Understood. But the reason it's important for us to figure out how to not invite that to the party, but how to address and frame what's in lieu of it. Okay. And that's what I'm trying to get to. And the reason it's important for us to is not because you and I are across from each other in disagreement. I have a feeling we're not at all. But the people coming to the party 6 months from now are bringing all of that legacy stuff with them unconsciously. And part of this is, from a place outside of the cave, how do we facilitate the sort of grokking and internal individual process of awareness and understanding and shift. And for me, from the time I joined GCC to now, I've been introducing or sharing language, Fabian and I involved, for describing certain things about human collaborative endeavor that at this point almost everybody is using. Like, I haven't heard anybody use the word producing as opposed to being generative or generating in a long time. That's like a very conscious, aware language shift that we fought our way to get to. Like, what do we replace produce with? Because we kept having conversations about, collaboratively, get to an output, produce an output, and that language just sucks you back. You're all of a sudden you're back in the frickin' factory. It's so ingrained and programmed. And so how do we replace this piece? What do we replace this piece of the puzzle with? How do we language it? How do we describe it? And, our work, hypothesized the idea of focusing on collective co-created values as a foundational step in organizational transformation. Well, the truth of the matter is, between you, me, and the wall, I don't think even that is something that can be, quote, codified. It needs to be something else. It needs to be done, and it needs to be understood and internalized and owned by every employee in an organization, bottom up. But the codification piece, the framework piece, the hardening up piece, no, like, not required or necessary if substantively everybody's there. But there needs to be a mechanism. We do envision a mechanism where that gets translated into an agreement, and it gets translated into an actual tool where somebody can go, I'm about to do this, how does it align? Like, is it values aligned, or does it take us out of alignment in any particular aspect that would be value destructive? Right? So it's a very concrete thing, mechanical thing, technology enabled thing, but how to define and express the capturing of it, the standing of it up, without invoking the framework and it's that framework, rules of engagement, guidance, direction. All of that is power, authority, control. All of that is like the old thing.
Yes, I recognize that. Yes.
And shit.
I don't use the term rules of engagement anymore, by the way. I don't think you've actually heard me say that.
No. And I want you to understand, I'm not reading that into you or your position. Mm-hmm. I'm sharing with you the nature of this transformative generative process, right, that for Fabian and I is the living extension, in terms of being the change, the living extension of this idea of human being centered first, right, experiential, in service to commons. How does that, propagate in these kinds of areas? Like, how do we do it differently? How do we do it better? And I haven't figured that out. Like, I'd love us.
Yes, we need to
co-create that, co-create, co-evolve that.
Because it's probably not it should go unsaid. You guys have written a paper about this. Right? That paper exists, it's an artifact similar to some of the artifacts that, I've tried to create myself. In fact, it's longer than some of the ones that I've tried to create myself, right? So there's value in having those artifacts. There's value in having those words, that thought transcribed into words, transmitted via electronics, received via email or Facebook or whatever. No question, right? You get that, right? Now, clearly, I'm not saying there's no process before that. There's clearly a process that you go through before you actually write something down, okay? And I would argue you and Fabian didn't think that the minute you wrote it down, it was obsolete and irrelevant. You're still circulating it today, So, I would say we're not sure. Verdict is still out. Like, as we started to sort of try to flesh out the website, which we saw as a sort of gateway to model the platform and the projects, and starting, seed crystals for approaching things through this lens. But I'm not sure whether it works. I think there are those for whom that works. There are vastly more for whom it needs to be something else. It needs to be a graphic or narrative, and for other folks it needs to be presented with a video, and for other folks it needs to be presented through whatever. Even in that, the articulation, I don't know that the fixation and articulation we've arrived at is the story. Not sure yet. Tammy, I'm going to assume that whenever you have something to say, you'll interrupt me, because going with the energy, I'm going to try and respond to Doug on this point. Okay, and that is that on the way towards achieving some planetary scale or impact, we know we've got to take the intermediary steps, right? So on the way towards getting things right, we know we have to take intermediary steps, okay? Now, the fact is, I agree with you. At the moment anything is written, the very next moment it can be improved. No question. That's the whole premise behind Agile, behind bootstrapping, behind learning, behind growth. That's the whole premise. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't take that step. That step is still necessary. So what I think is each step, if recognized as an attempt, our best current offering, okay? And that we're open to improvement of it. And by the way, if you read the how-tos, that's exactly how they're positioned, okay? The improvement is invited. So if we take every offering, whether it's a CMM paper or the PFTF presentation or a how-to or Doug's manifesto or whatever, as a current best expression, met with the best of intentions, at the best possible understanding at the moment, that the very next moment is a receptivity towards an improvement, a perspective change, a paradigmatic shift, a difference in wording, whatever it is, okay? Then that's a live thing, that's a living thing. And it doesn't matter that it becomes irrelevant. But until you change it, it's still the best available. And that's the thing that I think is of value. Some of these documents I haven't changed since 2015. Either I haven't had the time or I've written it elsewhere, but the notion is it's all a living thing. If we carve it into marble or concrete, a little bit harder, okay? So, we marvel. In fact, I marvel when we went to China at how many temples had granite and marble inscriptions by the thousands. That people thought it's so important to capture these things so that they could live for thousands of years, possibly tens of thousands of years, that they actually put it into marble. I don't know how many people today put any of their creations into marble or concrete or, granite, but they used to do that thousands of years ago. Anyway, so what I'm saying is that I don't need to be correct at any given moment. I just need to be the best possible at that moment, according to what I think my values are. And even those values are going to change, okay? We used to believe, as you say, in the industrial value of efficiency. Boy, I shucked that a long time ago, okay? We used to believe in things like language, sophistication. I shucked that one a long time ago, I don't talk like a professor. I try not to. I'm trying to talk more like a regular person. So I think this, while it is abstractly true that everything is irrelevant and obsolete the minute you produce it, I think in a practical sense, it doesn't have to be quite so black and white. And that we still use our constructs, our artifacts, the best possible expression at the time that it was offered. Until we change it, it's still the best possible. And there's value there. And again, I get a sense of, and I'll use the word again, recoil of not doing this, and I'm just trying to point out that, hey, the paper exists, the CMM paper I'm talking about, each of these responses on Facebook exists. Each of these offerings that I'm writing up exist. And by no means do I think they're either correct or, worthy of, or ready for adoption. They're just best possible, ready for improvement. And that mindset allows us to keep going and take steps. If I'm saying, geez, this thing's going to be obsolete the minute I release it, therefore, who's going to care? Who's going to look at it? I'm not going to produce anything if that's what I truly believe. And I don't believe that. Over.
I'm going to jump in and talk about the barn.
Excellent.
So I guess part of what we're dancing around in a sense is, what is this barn we speak of? Right. And, absolutely so much to agree on with what both of you have been sharing back and forth. And I think it's really important to clarify where we have those trigger words and these sorts of things, because it is part of what is a block and gets in the way when we hear a word and it takes us somewhere else. So I think all of that is really important to deeply consider, discern, understand. But back to the barn. There's part of, I think, what's happening, if I just throw out a bit of a visual metaphor, is that we've been crafting, in a sense, the doorway to the barn. How do we get in? And the foundations at the same time, right? So It's like, what is it? And it's informing it, and how do we get in, And so for me, I think the barn is all of humanity connected in a co-visioning process. The entire barn. And to do that, we need to look at the materials we're working with, the use of what it is to be connected, what the challenge is that we're looking to solve, which is, for me, the extractive, resource-based production paradigm that Doug is talking about. My friend Don Morrison from the Working Group on Indigenous Food Sovereignty talks about, and it's a paradigmatic shift from a lot of what is right now to what can be if we choose to co-create, co-design, co-imagine, co-evolve our ways of knowing, being, and relating towards systems that can be in service to us empowering ourselves and every human being. Starting with human beings, recognizing that we are a part of a whole system, of which at the moment humans hold great power, sway, and effect. So, Sam, you're part of what I've heard you share, and I'm deeply inspired by, is that you see this space as a place where a community of impact can form and be made real, and that there are the blend of what you're both saying is that that's not created yet, and we need to take some stabs at it, right? And so I think it's useful for us to look at what based on what has been, and those elements that deeply challenge the capacity, conditions, the context under which we can enact these new systems and ways of knowing and being together, that we need to start somewhere. And knowing that not every contribution can possibly be complete. In fact, it is a part of a global deep consideration process of what it is that we actually need. So in bringing it to my body, myself here right now, I need to be able to make my contributions and to be able to be seen, heard, understood, appreciated, loved, and valued not just in terms of being able to participate in the economy, which is the industrial format, but rather appreciated simply for who I am. And so for me, I would say that one of the superpowers that I identify with is being able to see the critical path. There's all of the kind of global political events, socio-cultural movements, all of those sorts of things that are going on right now that are creating a context that we have a drive and responsibility to respond to. And in my deep considerations, I see a potential powerful intervention to be that we create a system of value creation and exchange that is an opt-in system that is afforded to every human being on the planet as a starting place for a transition between the extractive accounting paradigm to a whole system recognition / accounting, so that we can reformat and reconceptualize how we count and what is of value, and how we can personally, each one of us, create value that can be connected to this global system of that can shift, like that can actually meet where the greatest challenges in the world today are. So, and I just want to draw lines between our collaboration proposal and the global governance piece. For me, governance, it's a little bit of a shell game, because governance is about how, at the end of the day, at the bottom line, it's about how we spend our money. And those decisions are hidden behind many processes that are a big part of the problem. The system's broken and has been crafted such by non-human entities that have taken over the power base in many ways. So what I would like to see is for us to consider creating a decorporation. What is it to give every human being on the planet the same affordances as corporate entities in terms of value creation, generation, access to be able to share and exchange what we naturally are, do, bring, and be, so that we can see that and we can participate with that. And so for me, there's an economic element, there's a democratic element, there's our voice, our that baseline where each person is of value, and a reframing of what and how we can create and exchange. So in terms of bringing it to this moment, some of the kind of, if I were to stick a pin in it, I would like to have something that the three of us right now are creating something. We are focusing our time and attention to look at how we would raise a barn, how we would create something that includes all of our contributions and all the contributions following this one, so that we can, so we want to do that. Now, who owns this moment? Who owns this artifact that is being created? These are the questions that I think that allow us to enter into the kinds of agreements that can be really grounded in what it is that we're creating. So I would suggest that, at the end of sessions like this, that we check in about who we want to share it with, and ways to be able to bring this artifact into, realize it as a piece that can engage, inform, demonstrate, and show what is needed, so that all of the references that each of you have contributed are available within that construct. These are the things that we're talking about. Now, when it comes to ownership, I think it's a really important conversation to have. Just that the only thing that I actually have ownership over is how I present myself. who I am, those artifacts of my identity. And because I've opted into having a conversation with both of you, where your identity is interwoven in this creation, that those agreements are simple starter agreements to be able to say, this is our moment we own. And if we have created value here that we want to share with others, let's agree with how we want to put that out there. Being open to all kinds of ways that can look like, but as a starting place of, we decided to, we decided to have this conversation. We decided to share this beautiful work. We decided to test our assumptions. And we decided then to put it out to a specific cohort of people that we know will, that we think may respond to this work, right? And so in terms of the practice of being and the barn that we're noticing needs to be raised, for me, one key entry point is this practice and all of the attendant elements and dimensions of what's happening here, because we're each bringing a lot of different pieces, and how do we make it understandable? And so, it's this interoperability, human interoperability. It's this ability to express and co-conceive and watch where, something that Doug said, I was like, oh, right, yes, there's a new moment that happened there. And that openness for participation, I think, is really, really important. And that point of tension around nailing things down, really it's about being able, a minimum viable expression, and then adding those pieces of the tapestry that's missing, without a sense of saying that was wrong, right? Because it's not wrong. It's just not complete, right? And we all know that any expression cannot be complete. And if we can become more comfortable with knowing that our piece is going to inspire other thoughts, is going to beg challenge for assumptions that we may not realize we're carrying into the conversation, that this gives us those capacities to be able to work together more easily, and not have things that stick with us personally, or if someone's challenging a piece of the work, that it's not, I disagree and that's not welcome, and these sorts of things that can be how these things are taken. And in terms of the breakdown of human systems, often are the things that actually are no-go points. So we can find ways to be softer, more sensitive, more clear, as well, not just pussyfooting around, but just saying, actually, when you said that, it landed this way, and I just want to own that for me, I fell off, my attention moved away, which is an important part of the signaling. And so yeah, the barn, I just wanted to come back to what it is that we're creating or seeking to create, and in the process of articulating, so that it can be easier for people to see how their stuff can hang. Is it a shingle on the barn? Is it a structural support to the roof? Is it a loft tea party space where we can go and take our breaks and really understand why the heaven we need a barn in the first place? And with that, I am complete.
See, I like the generative nature of the barn metaphor, because if I may suggest, a slight modification to what you just described, which is beautiful, by the way, Tammy. I like it. I think that we just arrived with our pickups, and we're not actually yet. Sorry, I got to get rid of that. So we're just arrived, and we may be in, one of our garages, so we're just in the practice of saying, do we need a foundation? That's what we're asking, okay? So we think we need a foundation. We think we need a doorway. We think we need a window. That's pretty much what I feel we're doing. We're not actually in the process of creating the barn yet. We're in the process of trying to figure out what needs to go in the barn and what parts of the barn do we need to devote some attention to. That's a slight refinement, but I think it's an important refinement because it means, we're not actually even at barn 0.01 yet. We're still in, what is this little sheet of paper and, what little boxes are we going to draw on it that represent the barn that's going to be created and stood up, okay? So I think that's a refinement, and I hope it's not viewed as a negative one. I'm just trying to put it in the context of where I'm thinking we are in that metaphor. And it's not a bad place. It's a great place. Because, who was it that said before anything is created, it first has to be created here before it's created in, reality, right? So we're creating it here right now and choosing to share it in some way, either by paper or by this audio or video or by some other expression that we're going to write up on a web. But it's that, that we're sharing. What we think a barn needs to be. Not yet the barn, but what we think needs to go into that barn. And that's a conversation we can invite lots of people to. And everybody's got a sense. I may not know anything about tiles, and somebody else is going to bring a lot of information about tiles and Elon Musk's, brand new tiles that I've never heard of before, right? And somebody's going to bring some other thing that's going to be, way excellent, the cooling system. And then all of a sudden, just like this stone soup, all of a sudden it's not a barn, it's a skyscraper when we're all done with it, But we start by saying we want to raise a barn, single room, just a couple of stalls, a little hay, the minimum viable barn. Okay, let's start there. So that's what I'm thinking. Just a slight refinement to our thinking about that metaphor. But otherwise, it's perfect. And this notion that we just need to start, but start with the best possible judgment of each of us. It's not just taking a shot, okay? Too many people are doing that. We've done that way too much. We have to take a judicious shot in the best possible direction we together can figure out how, with the best information and knowledge and experience and wisdom and guidance and values that we each are bringing to this, to say, this is the shot we're going to take, not that one. That's what this is about, to me. Over. Sorry, not over. And the fact that we're each sharing that voice. And we bring such different perspectives. But as far as I can tell, we're really each open to listening and understanding and figuring out, is this a matter of wording? Is this really a fundamental different idea? Is this, something that's really informed, something greater that we can create? That's what's cool about real-time interaction. That's what we can't get if we do it asynchronously. I can't in real time respond. I have to do it over much longer time periods if it's asynchronous. And that, I think, is the value of this. So that's a huge way of saying, I like it. It's a great metaphor. I think you let me get a few things, into this pool of meaning. So, it releases, if you want to use that language, some tension, within myself to make sure that some of it's available for consideration. But it's not because it's for me. It's because I want to make sure that, the community derives some value from it and that we can take those steps toward being what we want to be. Yes, I'm using the B word because being includes doing, being includes, having an effect, representing, standing up for something, being seen a certain way. That's part of being. Over.
I'm a happy camper. It's stuff's beginning to emerge out of the murk, and And I think we could probably the sort of gestalt or orientation behind the CMM piece is to put arms around the affordances that aspire to serve people wherever they are, wherever they're living, whatever they've got coming in the door, what they know, what they don't, what their level of, fluency, literacy, or lack thereof is, whatever. But the idea is that anybody should be able to come in, put their hat on a peg, sit down, pull up a chair, and contribute and join in.
And in aid of that, I'm going to encourage both of you to not acronym, because those, when you say CMM,
right,
it creates a barrier.
Okay. No, thanks for the catch. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So the vision, CMM was shorthand for Collective Metacognition Machine Works, but what it really is about is, what does the platform look like? What is the online platform, virtual space, set of tools and affordances and behind-the-scenes automations that would really help everybody join, contribute, participate, be of value, be acknowledged and recognized for their contribution, and put their shoulder to the wheel on whatever, wherever they are, on whatever scale or basis they're pulled and inclined to do. So that's the sort of vision. It's the technology enabled support virtual environment tools, services, etc. That doesn't exist, but that would be really, really helpful if it did. And can we sort of frame that up and build that up? That's the barn for me. And it is emergent, and I think it is something that as we start to harden it up, more people will get it and be able to chime in, and certain people will experience pull. And the hard part, and I think, Sam, you sort of just gave voice to it and modeled it, which is, I want to make sure that people get mine, right? Gavin, I want to make sure people get the pieces I'm on. It's not that my pieces are exclusive of anybody else's pieces. It's not necessarily even the extrapolated my pieces are the pieces for, the solution. It's just getting heard and acknowledged on a fundamental basic human level. And I have no attachment to what I've articulated or fixed on paper around what I call the CMM, but is really an acronym for, the platform, this platform that doesn't exist, that everybody wants and could use and would help. Enabling folks to feel like they've had the ability to do that, to sort of show their wares or contribute their value, in a way that doesn't trigger an aversive response, because we're programmed to experience that as selling, as push, which is, behaviorally, we're all programmed and very sensitive to anybody pushing anybody presenting anything being a sale or a push, right? So that's, an inbuilt reactivity and judgment, and it's like a whole filter on the experience. I think it really helpful if we could figure out how to sort of neutralize that effect on a really substantive level. And then this iterative process of digesting as they share, like, enabling sort of a back and forth and massage and whatever in the process of that, but cumulatively getting everybody in the barn with their stuff and getting, in that process, everybody up to speed on everybody else's stuff, but starting to homogenize and blend and cohere the ingredients and contextualize them so that, the collective wisdom and vision can be, can emerge. So I'm complete.
So Doug, the last 30, 45 seconds you were talking about, I kind of came up with at least two things that for me might be topics for next unblocking conversation. This idea of language, this idea of terminology, this idea of acronymization. That's one. And the other is this idea of ownership, this idea of credit, this idea of being seen, which, because we've been so much in this industrial framework, has always been associated with compensation, income, commission, whatever the heck that really means, And it's not, much as we would love UBI, it's not here yet. So, we're all trying to figure out how to give and still survive. So to me, at least that's two possible ideas that I think would do a lot to unblock at least me, if not others.
Yeah, and Tammy's piece is sort of a extension of that too. For me, Tammy, in response to what you said, for me, I'm more attached. I've sort of jettisoned the whole industrial IP construct, because it was predicated on, the whole ownership and control meme was predicated on effectively assuming a premise of scarcity, that what I have somebody else wants or needs, and I control who gets it and at what price, etc. So that's the underlying sort of driver behind the industrial economic model, capitalist model, and I wouldn't choose, to my mind, to invite that to the party of tomorrow, of the world I would want to have. But the part of attribution, of embedded attribution, that says, this iteration or version of this piece of this puzzle is Doug and Fabian, and this piece is Sam Hahn, and this piece is Tammy Lee Meyer, and the video is a collective, attributive, co-created work of three of us as a blended expression, and that and this is very much how I saw Doug Engelbart, by the way. This is like a central piece to how I saw his vision in my mind of this idea of cascading and accruing attributions. That the issue of, quote, ownership or control is a sort of individual sovereign choice discretion that each person has. So it's not something that they need to negotiate for, or that the starting premise is each of us owns us, our contributive stuff, etc. In fact, what is our choice or decision individually, and how does that flow through to the collective reality? If I'm open source and Sam is, it's private owned, copyright notice at the bottom, and Tammy is, I'm not sure yet, and whatever, and what do we do with that, and where does the work go until and unless that's sort of resolved or worked out? So I think there's that layer, which has more to do with access and sharing and distribution, dissemination, whatever. The ownership meme I don't even like have in my quiver. I don't relate to ownership as a dimension of that. The value flow back, I think, is a question / challenge / subject for dive and exploration and innovation. Like, how could we monetize or create channels and means for money flows to come back for this kind of work, for this kind of investment of time and attention, and this kind of generativity? That's a question mark for me. But I don't necessarily attach it as a quid pro quo in relation to the authorship or in relation to the authority of, dissemination, distribution. I see it as an independent vector and puzzle to be figured out. But I'm definitely not in the mainstream with any of that.
Yeah. And by the way, I wasn't suggesting we have that call now. I was suggesting that for the unblocking call. But it is the case that, if we're talking about other people viewing this and entering the conversation, they're going to have these questions, So I think, it's nice that you're not thinking in those in those paradigms and using those words, but there are people who will be in those words and will be asking those questions.
So I'll jump in. When I use ownership, I'm consciously using a term that is fundamental to the challenges that we're facing in the world today. And I'm pointing our attention to something that needs to be created and done differently. And what I reduce it to is all I can personally own is myself and what I directly create and generate. And that's a sandbox to be able to deeply consider how generative value can be in a transformed paradigm of human interaction and connection. So rather than it being an end result, I'm just where I see one of the biggest challenges. So when I use that word, it's not because I think people should own things. That it is that we need to look at that concept, and in using that, one of the fundamental things that I would change in relation to that which I create and generate would be that that I can choose, right? And that the data that I generate, not only consciously in this way, this rich data artifact that includes all three of our contributions, plus the dogs and the cat, is something that can be in a different framework of value, right? As an example of how we can do things differently. If we owned our own data, the world would look very different. So we can choose to own this individual and co-created generative value that we're up to, as a way to look at how even the systems that exist today in their extractive frameworks can transform into something that's in service to each individual first. And that, you know, so for me, the tools of the commons are those platforms that allow an aggregative, distributed decorporation event to be made visible and able for anyone to interact with, to help to inform what could be. So that's that really open space of, we have a chance to co-design a new series of systems and affordances for interoperability with everything that has ever been created. What do we want that to look like? Starting from where we are, which is we've all got burning passions and a deep knowing that we're at the end of a road here, and that we need to put our visions on the table. We need to look at the contextual pieces that have created the conditions in which we find ourselves. We need to look at the fundamental spaces of intervention where we are empowered to do something different if we can lay down our beliefs that it's not possible. And rather than having something that is fully created with a bow, that we all understand that we are contributing to a potential that needs to be tested, tires kicked, challenged with much work that has been created all over the planet that feeds into and connects what we are working on here. And so, yeah, I just wanted to touch in terms of ownership and the shift of that. And just to throw a curveball in at the end, I'm going to barn into the alphabet code. So the alphabet code being a way to use language as a tool to look deeper into what the informing energy is. So barn, and it's interesting because what we're using it for as a metaphor is an extrapolation from what a barn actually is, but it works, which is why it's interesting. So barn in the alphabet code means being all that is and all that is not, and activating within. So there is a really interesting coherent sense.
Sort of perfect, isn't it?
Yeah. You know, it's a state of being, it's everything, it's activated, and it's inside all of us. So how do we unlock each of our internal visions of barns to get to the point where we truly are co-creating what the heck a barn actually is? So with that, I will pass the mic.
I love that. That's just perfect.
I really feel good about the depth in some of the ways we've been able to consider this conversation and consider the barn and consider how we actually get towards a mutual understanding of that barnness. I think is really cool. So it's something that has leveraged each of us in our unique approaches. That is kind of the essence of why these conversations take place. So I'm very happy having this conversation today.
Can we co-create a bit of a harvest for completion for our session today? perhaps, and I was going to just let someone go, but felt that space. Perhaps we can put some grounded next steps, what we may choose to do from what we're learning in this session.
I'd love to do that, but my dogs are about to pee in my office if I don't let them out.
Shall we take a 10-minute break and just pause the recording and come back?
Yeah, I can be back in 10 minutes, yes.
Okay, great. Let's do that. So if you want to just pause, Sam, that would be fantastic.
All right. We're back. So you were saying something about harvesting?
Yeah, so just in terms of part of this is what have we learned? What have we what are some of our takeaways, as well as what are there any actions that we would like to take to further each other's work, and to continue to frame up what it is that we're doing, specifically in terms of the barn raising and articulating the tools, affordances, ways of knowing and being that we have co-discovered today. And I would invite further narrowing of how we may want to form this takeaway piece.
Okay, so I'll jump in first. For me, it was very, very useful to understand, at least from a first primitive, rough approximation standpoint, how the pieces that the three of us bring relate to each other. You know, Doug brings a being piece, you know, which translates to a conversation piece, which I think you bring, Tammy, and then brings a kind of a collection piece, or kind of a mining, or a kind of a recording piece that you represent, but I also am trying to leverage. And then there's some other pieces that are beyond that, but at least those three pieces and how they connect is at least one diagram I'm willing to draw now, just based on just understanding how the three of us have been talking today. The other nugget I think I would probably walk away with is this mini metaphor of us just kind of looking at what the schematic of the barn needs and where we've been focusing some of our conversation today. You know, one of us, I think it was Doug or maybe you, Tammy, was talking about how we spent so much time talking about the door to the barn, okay? And that is one aspect of what this conversation has been about. Another has been, what is the straw or the dirt that needs to be at the bottom of it, you know? So there's another piece there. So that's another possible write-up or diagram that I would come up with. There's some items that I would note that are possibilities for future conversations. By the way, in Agile, there's always what's working, what's not working, what do we want to keep doing, what do we not want to keep doing, what should we do new. But the last question is the most interesting one from my mind is, what do we not yet understand and yet don't have to? In other words, what can we still park for future conversation? If you try to solve everything at one time, you're never going to get on the next sprint, next iteration. So it's useful to say, what do we not understand, and save that for future conversation. And there's particularly one I know with Doug and me around some of the metaphors Doug's using, some of the metaphors I'm using. I'm not going to go into detail here because now we're going to end up having it here. But anyway, we'll have to hit that one at a separate time. So those are at least three things of the thousands of things that were learned here today. But those are three things that I know are concrete that I could actionize, activate, log.
For the harvesting piece, I'd actually like, Tammy, you did 2 chunks that were perfect. So those are worthy of like clipping and standing up on their own as a contextual framing of what the here is for me. And a thing that emerged out of this that I'm feeling that I think would be valuable, helpful, is I think if it would probably be constructive in bringing this enough more to ground in terms of the building of the barn piece to sort of map the conceptual landscape for the platform to be, for the platform we would all want or that would be most valuable. I think what I'm going to do is, as sort of a takeaway and an action step, because the CMM document was sort of that in terms of where it was coming from, was a picture in my mind. As a first iteration toward generating a generic map we could hang work and contributions and pieces of the puzzle on or contextualize within under this sort of platform construct, Barn as platform, is I'm going to take a spin, see whether I can take a spin, assuming it's freeware, in thought space, because I do see it being very holonic, with creating a map, sort of a very high altitude, top level map from the CMM document as a starting place and as a thing that we can then generate and modify, expand, enrich with people's offerings as a way of sort of getting arms around the landscape in a holistic way. And I think it might be an interesting piece of the puzzle to begin to evolve and elaborate as we go. Because there's Gavin, I know there's all of your stuff, Sam, which I think has homes based on what I've gotten of your pieces of the puzzle. I think have homes in within a map like that. Gavin has some stuff, Harry has some stuff, and I suspect there are a whole bunch of people with other pieces of the puzzle that either may apply directly on a plug-and-play basis or call the question for an affordance or capability not on the boards, but that would be valuable, helpful in terms of a back-end facilitative thing running behind people working together. So I'll take a spin at that for our next round.
So just 5 seconds on that before Tammy gets in. What you just described was my bullet number 2, just with very different words. Just curiously, it's just curious how we can conceptualize and verbalize differently.
I love this. I feel like we are really sort of grounding in the work, and I very much appreciate these specifics, right? What I want to kind of go a bit to what I've learned first, which is I was just really noticing at in particular at the beginning of this session, that the properties of what it is when you share and then to kind of take in how it's heard. So that is one of the protocols to see how what you're sharing is received. And I think that that capacity to be able to stop on broadcast, to check in with what is being heard, so there's not too much of a lag to include other pieces or to clear up word issues, helps us to be able to move faster. Seems slower and is a bit of a hiccup in terms of the expression, hold on, when you said that word, it landed as ownership and I got some problems with ownership, right? So the quicker we can get literally interruptions to and find ways to be able to interject, co-weave, co-understand. I feel like today we really worked on that as a practice. And there is a lot of breadth and depth to what it is that we're bringing. The pipe is wide. And truly how I experience it is as a collective remembrance. Time doesn't work in the same way in this space of co-creating the future than we consider and understand at this moment. So there's some really foundational and fundamental pieces around the nature of reality that we're testing when we do this work. And it literally unpins the legs of the paradigm that we've been embedded in. And so for me, as long as there's the safety between us to be able to test, deeply consider, challenge, co-evolve, add the pieces, and the understanding that that is actually physically uncomfortable because we've been entrained in boiling it down into a soundbite and making it specific, that capacity is something that we're evolving. And I felt that evolution in practice today with all of us. And so deep appreciation for that. And in terms of the shift of paradigms, I'll just lay in a little bit here about the alphabet code. The alphabet code, as you go through the alphabet itself and it land at the end is the paradigm shift itself. It's all driving towards a shift in paradigms, which is literally we're cruising along and then we realize, oh shit, not only is there a cliff, but it's carved out to an entirely different reality that we need to find that track on and get on. So I see us at this corner of that Z and turning the corner to create and be on that new track, which causes a lot of free fall, a lot of, oh my goodness, what are the edges of this? And a fair amount of cognitive dissonance, because that which we are surrounded with now informs how we understand what we might create. So I'm really grateful that we're here to be able to kind of break some of that down and look together at how we can turn that corner to land on, another timeline that is more grounded in the human needs and the needs of our entire system. So for me, the ways that we can manifest that is by exactly what we're doing. We're gifting, we're sharing from a whole place what we have to offer. And to give that value it must be received. And so in terms of what's been happening with the Global Challenges collaboration and our process, we've been working out how do we receive each other. And I would like to offer a couple of thoughts towards how we can make that turn more concrete and real. And I have a couple of suggestions for consideration. Number one, we actually do have some collective resources in the form of fiat currency. We have, I think, about $300 or something like that. About 4 months ago, Sam bought some URLs, and I would like to suggest to this group that our collective resources pay for those URLs, so that that is something that, if Sam is open to giving that ownership to this group, that, oh, Sam can't hear anymore. Oh, that's so interesting.
Sorry, testing. Can you hear me? I'm
Yeah,
frozen.
You froze for a second.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Is that why you're nodding?
Yeah.
Yeah, see, I can't hear you. I can see you. I cannot hear you. To
Okay,
me, I
Sam.
look frozen, but you seem to be able to hear me.
So Sam, if you can, I think you might need to leave and come back. Oh, you can't hear me.
All right. I hate to do this, but I want to make sure I capture what you're saying, Tammy. Can we shut this down and restart in 30 seconds? Is that okay? All right, thanks. Let me try and do that. Testing, can you hear me? You're on mute.
I can hear you.
Okay. I don't know why all of a sudden it happened on my, so I'm on a different laptop now.
Okay, no worries. I'm just gonna ping Doug with the with this link. So, okay, that's done.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't want to miss your wrap up here, so I just want to make sure we got that.
Absolutely. I much prefer the lighting from this angle in your room as well.
Okay.
Yeah, your face is well lit. So, and oh, and you're fully materialized already. Wow. Okay, so as a suggestion, in terms of us making decisions together and creating protocols for what that might look like, again, I think we just need to start in the middle. And Sam has contributed to buy those 4 domains, .info, .com, or 3 or 4 domains. And I would suggest that our collective resources pay Sam back for that, because that is in service to the commons that we're creating. It doesn't have to be that way. It could also be noted as Sam has contributed X amount of dollars to our collective process. That's another way. But I would suggest that it's not a bad idea to create a container, a decorporative container for commons held assets that may start with the URLs and the purchase of them. Now, for me, what that also creates is the potential and the ability for others to contribute the pieces that they are bringing, and to have some sort of form to be able to receive those contributions in a way that is is agreed upon and feels good in the new paradigm that we're creating. So I have, pieces that I would like to contribute to the commons as well, some of which are URLs that can either be a line item in terms of I have contributed this, regardless of whether it's a thing that cost me financial resources or whether it was 10 years of work or these, different types of contributions, of which I think we need to consider very, very openly what contributions are, including this moment and this investment of 3+ hours of barn raising to others who may be viewing this later. That's a contribution, as Doug, you have clearly articulated for us in terms of how you bring your pieces in a different kind of exchange and way that we relate and co-relate our work together. So I think that gifting, like what I've learned from my friend Dawn in terms of the ancient indigenous ways of knowing, is that it's a gifting economy. Your wealth comes from what you can give, and that creates a collective benefit that shows the value by the nature of its isness, right? When your work has gone to catch the fish or to receive the fish and process it for the community, that is all a collective contribution that feeds the entire community, tribe. And it is a different way of knowing and being. And I would point to the ways that Indigenous people have been treated here in North America as a key and fundamental schism that has created the context of where we are. And I think it serves us to look at these ancient ways of knowing and being, to be able to create something that is more whole, human centered. And I would, my intuition and my sensing is that Indigenous ways of knowing and being all over the planet give us wisdom, guidance, knowledge, and well-developed systems of value and sharing that help us to turn the corner on this paradigm. And that without that recognition of these ancient ways of knowing and being, we're not incorporating the fullness that is possible. Sam?
I really didn't realize we were going to go quite this long. I have a mattress being delivered. I just heard the truck pull up. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll complete there.
Actually, can you guys still complete? And for the record, I will view it, but I don't want to chop it off. I just have to not let these people just wait out there.
Sam, as a protocol for when you have to go before it's ended, switch the host to one of us so that we can end it and there's not a gap at the end.
Okay. All right.
Perfect.
I think it's a good ending place, but I love that. That works for me, makes sense to me. Mm-hmm. And that's probably the best reference source we could go to for models of systems that, evolved out of being in alignment and harmony with ecosystem and by biome and planet and all of that. I love that idea.
Yeah, I for me, there's a space that really just feels like remembrance. And it is a resonant field that holds a knowing that connects us all.
Yep.
So I'm trying to access what are the ways that we can feel into that and be together in that, while not, this making it specific to this is the answer is not it. There needs to be an open space to be able to receive and deeply consider what has been and can be. So, yeah.
Very cool.
Thank you. In terms of the attributes of what you have said that you'd like to create, is there a potential to have to call a group conversation that can come from that starting point, or would that be next Tuesday? Or
I think it could be. I think it could be next Tuesday. It could also, based on sort of a general posting and signaling of this is what this is, and if anybody is so inclined to sort of take a look, ruminate, mull, and or sees sort of resonance and correspondence to their work, contribution, insight, whatever, in service to attaching or drilling down or introducing more. So, we could leave it open. I don't know that we have to pre-commit, but create the opportunity possibility.
Yeah. Great.
That works.
Wonderful. Cool.
We're done.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
You want to stop? You're moderator, so you want to stop record and.
Sure. And with that, we are momentarily complete. Oh, it isn't. We have to end meeting because he's actually recording on his end.
Okay.
So, see you next time.